some of you may have noticed, I am not Jean Burke. I am, in fact, Tema Burke, and I teach in the English department and coordinate the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, which is hosting this event, along with the Office of the President, Capital Giving, and Alumni and Parent Relations. I did see Allison somewhere. Oh, hi, Allison. And the Women's Center. And Stephanie is here in the Women's Center. Whitney up there, High School. And Francesca. And Jean asked me to begin by just telling you how this idea all started, how this all came about. It all began with a very generous contribution to the Women's Studies program by an alum from the 70s. And we wanted to thank that alum. But then as we thought about it, we also wanted to thank all the women of the 70s and all the women of the 50s, 60s, all the women in the history of Gettysburg College who had led to where we are now here in the present. But as we started thinking about this program, I pulled different people together, and I want to thank them all at this point. One was Fred Brown, who's sitting in the front row here for Capital Giving, Fred Brown, and Allison Singley from Alumni and Parent Relations, and Jean LeGros, who is the eternal Gettysburg alum, and also Robin Wagner and Karen Trickemer, who are in the library, and Joyce Sprague, who was our indispensable Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies administrative assistant, without whom none of this would go as well as it does and as smoothly as it does, to whom we are forever grateful for all the work she does for us. We met, that is all of us, and came up with many, many ideas, as you can well imagine, and even some of them actually made it into the program. Our main goals were to thank the donor in particular and to thank the 70s women in general, because the 70s was a decade of momentous change for women and men here at Gettysburg and in the world, and in many other places, even the world. And we wanted to acknowledge and celebrate this complex history. Also, the theme of this year's CPC conference is Women and Higher Education, and it's being held at F&M in honor of the 40th anniversary of their fortunate but disastrously delayed decision to let women in the class, with the class of 1970. As a result, Dickinson and F&M scheduled many exciting events about women's history on their campus and in the world, and I thought, well, we have to do something. It can't be outdone by our sister colleges down different roads. So we worked on this. We decided to plan an event to celebrate Gettysburg College women and their history over all the decades. And actually, in getting ready for the F&M event, I learned that Gettysburg has the longest history of co-education, as much as we don't think that word. It's very proud. We have the longest of all of our sister colleges. And we also wanted to use the occasion to look at ongoing changes, at how women's activism over all the decades led to the Women's Studies program and to its transformation into Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. So we created a faculty panel. And last but not least, we wanted our students to give us visions of the future as they see it. So we have several students on our student panel. Yeah, and we know you all have your own memories, and I can see them as you brought them here, and perspectives on the past, present, and future. We hope you will share them. After all, this is Women's History Month. So what better way to celebrate than to celebrate all of our different histories. It is now my pleasure to turn the podium over to the real Jean LeGros.
Thank you, Tema. It's just great to see so many friends here today. And as Tema said, on such a beautiful spring day, we're so glad you're all here. And I also want to recognize Tema and Tema's work. Tema was really the person who pulled all of this together and got the ball rolling on all this, and really want to thank her for her work today as well. We were joking because the program has a little typo in my class year, and Tema was all upset about this. She said, "It says 74, and you're really class of 73. I said, well, this really isn't a problem because I started with the class of 73, which I claim that was the class I started with, but I actually graduated in 75 with Karen O'Connor and some others here. So 74 is right in the middle of my two class years, so that's just why. I'm squarely in the 70s decade here. My title, very long title with emerita at the end is just a long way of saying that I retired from Gettysburg College 2 years ago and am now right up the hill at the Lutheran Theological Seminary pursuing an academic master's degree. It's just always a pleasure to be invited back to Gettysburg College and to work here at my alma mater on special projects like this. My master's, my thesis, which I'm writing right now, it's nice to have a little break, my thesis is about Mary Stukenberg. Who, you might say? Who is Mary Stukenberg? I know a few of you in the room know about Mary. Mary Stukenberg founded several groups of women, including the Home and Foreign Missionary Society for the General Synod of the Lutheran Church. 30 years later, she founded the Women's General League of Gettysburg College, and that was in 1911. So if you do the math, which I know we all do, it was just under 100 years ago that Mary founded this organization, which is still in operation right now. And over the last 99 plus years, it's raised just under $1 million for Gettysburg College. So it's had a significant impact on the college, and this all began with Mary Stukenberg, and it's just been wonderful to bring her voice to light in all of this. And of course, when she founded the Women's League in 1911, Gettysburg was an all-male institution, so I couldn't help but think what Mary, I'm sure she would be very pleased about this and would probably really be excited about being here today. She loved conventions of women, so I'm sure she would be an active participant in this. But today we're here to talk about the 70s and where we've come since then, and of course, as Tema mentioned, in the 70s, we all knew that change was in the air, and we were a big part of that change. We also knew that it didn't come without its joys and its challenges and its frustrations, and so we're here to talk about all of that today. And it's my great joy to introduce our panelists. You have all of their full bios on this yellow sheet, so I'm not going to go into things in detail. You can read this, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about each one. Starting at the far end here, Jane Risk, class of 1977. Jane's an attorney who went to law school some 20 years after she graduated from Gettysburg College. She founded LAW, which is the Legal Alliance for Women, which is a global organization devoted to the hiring, retention, and development of women lawyers. Jane's also the mother of 2 Gettysburg students. Jason graduated in '03, and Katie is a junior this year, so it's wonderful. Next to her, Helen Martyr. Helen is class of 1972 and is interim head of school at Grace Episcopal Day School in Maryland. She's also been head of 2 other girls' schools, including Agnes Irwin in Pennsylvania and the Laurel School in Ohio. Helen has a lifetime commitment to athletics and coaching, and she was really instrumental in advocating women's athletics here at Gettysburg College. She's been inducted into the Athletic Hall of Honor here at the college. At the far end, Vanessa Adams, class of 77. Vanessa is a civil servant. She's worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons since 1978. If you think, I think I recognize Vanessa, it's because, of course, you do. She was on the cover of Gettysburg Magazine several years ago, and she has received a Distinguished Alumni Award from Gettysburg College. Next to her is Susan Garrison, class of 74, who's an attorney who founded the Center Foundation in 1994, and that provides pro bono mentoring programs for disadvantaged women and teen mothers. And Susan has been a strong advocate for women and works for women through her leadership on many boards and foundations. And I should say that all of these women had different majors at Gettysburg College and pursued different areas of interest outside the classroom, but what they all have in common is they've all been involved with Gettysburg College since their graduation, and they all have a strong interest in advocacy and support of women. Last but certainly not least, we have Janet Riggs. Janet Morgan Riggs, class of 77, our president, and I know you know Janet. She too has been on the cover. So she is certainly a woman who needs no introduction. But I wanted to read a quote to you, which was given by Denitsa Koliva, who is the president of the student body at Gettysburg, of Student Senate here at Gettysburg. And this is what she said about Janet, which I thought was just so descriptive of Janet. What we value most in President Riggs is her unpretentious nature. Without ever tarnishing the dignity of her presidential office, she always welcomes us with openness, sincerity, genuineness, and goodwill. She has reached out to us by carrying our boxes on move-in day, joining us in the first-year walk, and working shoulder to shoulder with us on Give Day. She has shared our joys and our sadness, and through it all, she has earned our respect and admiration. So it's my pleasure to turn this over to Janet, and she'll explain a little bit about how the panel will run.
I am so glad to see so many Gettysburgians here, and I see so many familiar faces, which is just wonderful. And I'm going to apologize right now. I've had laryngitis this week, which I'm getting over, but I'm glad I'm not a panelist. I just have to talk just a little bit, which is just fine. I am honored actually to be up here with this distinguished group of graduates of the 70s. It is wonderful that they were able to come back. Some of you may notice that Cheryl Walker Davis is not up here, and she was going to be with us, but her uncle died, and so she was not able to attend today. And we're sorry we miss her, but we certainly understand her need to be with her family. As we asked our panelists to think about their remarks today, we asked them to think about two related questions. The first is, how did their experience as women on the Gettysburg College campus in the 70s influence their personal and professional lives subsequently? And the second question is that experience still relevant, given all of the change we've seen over the last 30 to 40 years? So we've asked them each to reflect on that a bit, and they're going to each talk, I think, about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we will open it up for some discussion that will engage you, I hope, and I hope as they're speaking, you will think of questions you would like to ask them. We're going to do this in kind of chronological order. So we're going to begin with Helen, class of 72, and then we'll go to Susan, class of 74, and then I'm going to go alphabetically by last name, 77. So Vanessa, you'll be the first 77 presenter, and then Shade. Okay? So we'll begin with Helen.
Well, I want to thank you, Janet, and persons who invited me to come. It's auspicious to be invited to one's alma mater, and particularly auspicious to be the oldest person on the panel. I know Dean Locker is older than I am. She was the Dean of Women when I was here, and I know Dr. Stewart is also older than I was, because she was older than I was when I was here. I can see also that Gettysburg has not accommodated some physical differences yet for persons who are in their 60th year, because there's not an interim podium here for those of us whose trifocals don't reach this distance. So recommend that to the president. I have some ideas in this book which I'm going to have to hold up now, because you're insufficiently supplied with speaking office wear. I had to smile. I do actually prefer smiling to anything else. When I saw Thomas Fennis, this program, and it said WGS, and I thought, well, how funny, because actually part of my experience at Gettysburg was the WSG, which of course is anachronistic, but that would be the women's student government. And none of us thought we needed a government particularly. That is to say, we women were in the minority here, about 60% men, 40% women when I came, and in 1968. And yet the WSG was really the hotbed of leadership training for those of us who were interested in that. I think the other hotbed was the sorority system. And I did that just for a few months and got impatient because I was fined for being late to a meeting. And I thought that was patently ridiculous, and so I got out of that organization. But I do know the secret handshake. Gamma Phi Beta, and I have never told anyone what it is. But I think, in my experience, those two organizations were places where women were kind of came of age, were brought up, were brought along. And I'll say something about the WSG when I finish. The way I've tried to structure my life and in the last 40 years and the 4 years at Gettysburg in 5 minutes It has to do with three sayings. You know, the 60s were turbulent. We sang songs, we had posters, we had sayings that meant a lot to us. And the first one really comes from our dear friend Grace Kenny, who was my mentor here, and she's here now, I know she is. And so Grace, I'm gonna call you Grace for the first time in your life. So Grace had an office in what I think really was the attic of the Eddie Plank gym, and it was about as big as this lectern. And as you walk downstairs from Grace's office, I see Mike shaking his head. There was a saying over, sort of on the back of the staircase, and it's this: those who dare to teach should never cease to learn. Those who dare to teach should never cease to learn. And I was a physical education major and hoped to teach, and I don't know how many times I went up and down those stairs in over 4 years, but almost probably as many as in my dorm. And that saying has really been on every vita, every educational philosophy that I've written, because I think that is very, very true. And particularly in that office, mostly the women trudged up and down, up and down, up and down. And Grace was really a militant feminist here for girls and women to be more recognized as human persons. I had size 11 feet then, and I do now. And during my time, it was determined that the women's basketball players would get basketball shoes from the men's repository. What a concept. We didn't have to buy our own Converse sneakers, white high tops. But women were not meant to have shoes over the size of 10. And so I had no shoes. Not. Now, of course, we had a lot of friends over in the men's area, and someone smuggled a pair. In this way, I took a brown bag in with a size 10 pair, gave it to them at the little door where the towels were handed out, and then they gave me a brown bag, and I smuggled back, and then I had the shoes that fit my feet. What an amazing thing today to think of that. I also was smuggled in the window, don't tell Dean Locker, under the cover of darkness with Kate Pottiger, because we had injuries, and we were able to smuggle in and see Romy Capozzi, the marvelous trainer, to have our injuries fixed. If we'd been caught, we probably would have been thrown out of the college. Of course, we were never going to get caught, so we didn't. But just an amazing time, and Grace Kenny was a part of that, enabling us to become more equal partners. I became famous as a field hockey player, and so I got a little bit of extra attention. However, one person who will remain unnamed in the physical education department failed me in a skills course. I think it was badminton, because I had to go play on the United States team at the national tournament during his skill final. And so I got an F. I don't think anyone really knew that, but I was at the time the most highly applauded athlete in the college, and I failed badminton because I had a higher calling, to be perfectly honest. When you play for the United States, you go and play for the United States. And so that wouldn't happen today, and we're grateful for that. The second part of my experience here certainly had to do with the chapel and Chaplain John Van Orsal, chapel council, training for being a dorm counselor, deeply moving and important to me. And my dear friend Paul Kaler, who I met on this day, read a prayer at chapel, and it started something like this: disturb us, O Lord, when we have arrived in safety because we have sailed too close to shore. Disturb us when we have arrived in safety because we have sailed too close to shore. Now, as it happens, Paul's wife is here today, and that's just serendipitous. What an idea that we were taught, that given what we had been given, we had much more to give. And in fact, to this day, that comes to my mind. And then sometimes I say, skip it, Lord. I'm disturbed enough. You know? Don't keep pushing me out into these places that I don't know what I'm doing. But it's a very powerful concept of the 70s, I think, and that we were called in many ways to see what could be different and to not be slotted into a cookie-cutter life. Another poster that John had at Chapel House was the one that said, a sign of God is that you will be led where you did not plan to go. And again, it's one of those sayings from my time here that has guided my life. I think that's true. And I believe that that has deeply influenced my life and my choices, and therefore what I've been able to do for the children that I've served as a school leader some almost 40 years. And finally, we had freshman convocation, and Dr. Mary Margaret Stewart was the speaker. And she gave a talk about, I would paraphrase this, and in fact she sent me the talk years later, the art of underachieving, and how it is that some persons set low goals so they always achieve them, and how the charge to this Gettysburg class of 1968 was to set high goals, and maybe to miss, and maybe to fail, but to keep a high standard and not set low goals that are achievable. And that has also been a saying in my heart and my life, and in my professional and personal life as well. The kind of friend that I am to my friends, the kind of teacher that I am, the kind of daughter that I have been, sister, cousin, all of those things, that to reach is really critically important, and to be as strong as possible and as high level as possible in many dimensions, I carry with me, because Mary Margaret told me that, and I believed her in the fall of 1968. Now I'll just say that, of course, these things continue today in my life and continue to enrich what I do. I was invited last summer to go to a reunion of the class of 1969 that was in Ithaca, New York. These women are older than I, of course, they were freshmen. I was a freshman and they were seniors, and around the table there were 3 people with PhDs, a physician, several civil servants, several teachers, a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army, and one of the teachers survived Columbine. One of the teachers survived Columbine, and they hadn't been together, these women, in the 40 years since they graduated, and we sat in the evening and we listened to that story. And it seems emblematic at some level to close with that, because that woman dared to teach and continue to learn, and that woman was in a place that she didn't know that she was going, and that woman did not set a low goal. She kept her biology class safe, no one was harmed, and she continues to work with that group of students. In that room, there were 3 past presidents of the WSG. And so my hat is off to the WGS, and I'm just pleased to be here. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say, I wish I had known you more when I was a freshman and you were a senior. That was really inspirational, and you did some fantastic things while you were here and since, and that was very inspiring. I came to Gettysburg College in September of 1970, and as we've kind of all talked about this, you know, the early 70s was on the cusp of change. It was a time of great social and legal change, with landmark decisions in the areas of discrimination, reproductive rights. And as a female student at Gettysburg College, one of the things that I was always very conscious of was that I was taken very seriously as a student by my fellow students and by my professors. And there was because partly of the fact that, as Helen said, you know, we were outnumbered. I thought it was actually more like 2 to 1, males to females.
It felt like that.
It felt like, yes, okay, you're right, it felt like that. And that might have been handy for dating. But on the other hand, it made us realize that at that time, at least, the females had to be a lot better students just to get in. And we were told that, even by the guys, they knew that too. But our professors really, I really felt I was given the opportunity to stretch intellectually and a sense of individual attention. Now, you understand, I came from a high school class of 735, so to have that kind of attention here was exactly what I wanted. And there were innovative things going on academically here at Gettysburg. I don't know when they stopped it, but we had that wonderful thing called J-term, that 1-month January course, and I was so thrilled freshman year, having gotten out of my writing requirement, when I was allowed to take Chaucer in J-term. It was really awesome. And then a few years later, you know, another cutting edge, there was actually a January term course on human sexuality. So a little precursor to the women, gender, and sexuality studies that maybe started in the 70s. At the same time, there were hints of the older times when this had really been a school for the guys. And Helen didn't mention this, but you know, as we women were newer, maybe we needed to be protected. So when I was a freshman, I was one of those women who had to be in by 11 o'clock in the dorm up until Thanksgiving. Now the guys didn't have to do this, of course, and for maybe some of us who had come from a sheltered home life, it might have felt very safe, but it certainly wasn't fair that only the women had to be in by 11. Continuing on kind of a personal note, it seemed to me that the early 70s were a time when it was not so far past that time when many women came to college and might have gotten an MRS degree as well as a bachelor's, and didn't necessarily all of them go on to have careers. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. But now, the fraternity system was, as it seems to be now, strong, alive, and well. At least it seemed that way from the number of folks that were on those porches when we rolled into town yesterday afternoon to stop at the Women's Center. So that's where some of those other folks were. And I was pinned to a senior for about 6 weeks until I realized I felt really branded by having this little thing that I had to wear every day or I was going to get in big trouble. So I gave it back, but we continued to date. And after he graduated, he was really surprised that I didn't want to drop out of school and get married. But that wasn't what I was here for. So needless to say, we didn't get married. But I actually did become a Mrs. while I was here at Gettysburg, and was again in the minority. I married my first husband, whom I met here. He was a teak. So we were actually allowed to go have dinner at the teak house. I had a special arrangement with the chef there. Not all the guys were very happy about it. But we had a wonderful little apartment up on Breckenridge Street. You know, one of the, I think it was a converted meat thing from the Civil War. And the college was very supportive of the fact that this was a little bit different. And, but again, it was not that uncommon in those days for, I'd say, it was uncommon for women to keep their own names. Now, I actually wanted to, but I was overruled. So I was really surprised when I came back senior year, and I was in Mrs. Pavlanto's Patty, as we called her, Greek history class, and I was really stunned when 3 times I heard her call out, "Mrs. Mayor, Mrs. Mayor, Mrs. Mayor," and I'm like, oh gosh, that's me. And there I learned the power of a name. Years later, I went back to my birth name, and those of you who have met my husband, Michael Campbell, will know that, as he will tell you, he didn't take my name when we got married either. So I gained Garrison again. But I just have to say that I had a wonderful time, both academically, and I had a lot of fun at Gettysburg. There were lots of activities. We did some things with our sister colleges back then, with having a joint literary magazine with Dickinson and Franklin Marshall. I was supposed to say fun. And you know, and Parker Wagnall and the college choir. I mean, there were just some wonderful experiences I had here and people that I met. But the sense of support that I had as a woman here gave me a lot of confidence. But at the same time, it didn't prepare me for the kind of discrimination that I encountered graduating in 1974 with a liberal arts degree and trying to find a job in Philadelphia, where what I was asked time after time after time was, can you type? Now, for those of you who are college students now and you don't know what a typewriter is, I've never seen one. Well, I know this from the interns we have in our office at the Center Foundation. It's kind of like a printer and a computer in one, but it has no memory and it's a lot heavier and bigger than a laptop. So anyway, now I knew because my husband at the time, he wasn't asked that. They were sending him into management programs. So, and it didn't prepare me for being in the minority at Villanova Law School a few years later, when there I was in the registration line, and some 21-year-old, I was like 25, so I felt very mature, came up to me and said, "What are you doing here, taking the spot of a man who should be in this law school?" And I thought this was pretty scary, but then, Villanova probably still doesn't have a women's studies program. Anyway, I do have to say, though, that one of the other things that I was allowed to do here at Gettysburg, even though we didn't have this great women, gender, and sexualities courses, we didn't have a women's center, but I was allowed and encouraged in every possible course that I wanted to research and write papers on the status of women in different cultures, from 5th century Greece to Renaissance and Reformation. And one of the things I learned from that was that it's economic independence that is the key to equality. And so that stayed with me in terms of my later work, both professionally and on a volunteer basis for reproductive rights, to helping disadvantaged women reach economic independence, because Virginia Woolf had it right. What women need is a room of their own. So I just want to thank you all for having me here. It's been really exciting to talk with some of the students, see the Women's Studies Center, the Women's Center yesterday, and thanks again.
Sorry, I was ready for the next person. And this me. It's a pleasure to be here. Often times when I have been invited back to Gettysburg, and I have to thank Daryl Grimes, who came up, class of '74. I appreciate the support. Oftentimes in the past, when I first graduated from Gettysburg, I would come back and I would share, how you get with your group and you're sharing what you were doing and the career you stumbled. And when they asked me, well, where did you go? Well, I'm with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And, and what do you do there? Well, when I first got here, well, I'm a correctional officer. What is that? Well, you heard prison guard? And then, of course, they beelined away from me. Then when I came back, I think on my 5th, I came back and they asked what I said, well, I'm teaching. Do you have to have a degree for that? Yeah. So it always has felt such an honor to advance in my field and be embraced by Gettysburg. Because it wasn't, I know it's very non-traditional, and it's not something when you look at Hollywood or the movies that people really think very favorably. And it is a field that I'm very proud of, and Gettysburg is responsible for that. When I reflect back on my times at Gettysburg, it is really difficult, and I really, really tried to reflect on it as a female on the campus. Because in my generation, in '73 to '75, I was really more viewed as a black person on campus, and my gender really didn't play much of a role. When I tried to get deeper into that, it was almost an invisible person, because even amongst, I think maybe at our high moment, we may have had 5 or 7 females, women, but it was always triple that of men. And so you were like, that part of you was somewhat invisible. So I can't, and I tried to make up stuff. But I really can't. Being a minority here definitely prepared me for my career. And the best way I think it did was that no matter what I went through, no matter what I heard, I knew I could achieve, and I knew I belonged. And I think if I didn't take anything from Gettysburg, I took that. Also took that no matter how tough the situation may be, or how alone you may feel, if you look up and reach out, everyone doesn't think that way, and they want to help you succeed. And I've done that. From Chaplain, Van Ors, I always have gotten his name incorrect, from my English professors, from Bruce Packard and Slaybaugh and others. Whenever I would reach out, or if they saw that, you know, you're just not quite Vanessa, I knew that I had support. And I think I definitely took that from Gettysburg to the sense that I've always expected it. J-term was wonderful. It was Slaybaugh and Bruce Packard who were responsible for me taking one of my favorite J-terms, and that was to study the British primary system in London, and we actually lived there in Chelsea. And I remember asking him, well, do you think I'm going to have any problems? And he says, if you do, we'll all come home. And I thought that was just so special of him. I don't know what would have come home, but he would have made sure I got home. Leaving Gettysburg in 77 was a very proud moment for me, because I had some mistakes and some stumps along the way, but I grasped that diploma, and it meant the world, meant many things. I remember my professor, my first advisor, telling me that this was a school for elite, and I was doing my family an injustice by being here and causing them to spend their money, because I wasn't on any financial assistance, and that I really should go somewhere else, because I didn't realize until I walked away and spoke to my roommate. She said, he just insulted you, and what he was actually saying. So those were the words that came back to me when I walked across that stage and grasped my diploma. Starting with the Bureau of Prisons, 1978, I started at a prison that had been forced to take women. 75 amendments were made that females could supervise, manage male inmates. And the prison that I went to had refused to do so, and they had been mandated. I didn't know that. I was working in headquarters in a temporary position. Someone asked me, did I want to join permanently with the Bureau? I said yes, I needed a job. They asked me, would I be a correction officer? I asked, what was that? They said counseling inmates. I said, sure, I could do that. And I don't know, I didn't take counseling in college, so why did I think I would do that? So I showed up on the doorsteps of the prison, and I heard that grill door slam behind me, and I was ushered into the warden's office, who began to tell me that college education did not run a prison, that I was the first one he had ever allowed in his prison with a college education, and I'd be the last if he had anything to do with it. That he had to take a female, and that he took 4 of us, but he wasn't taking any more, because he had 4 shifts. We would all be put on each shift, because he could only afford 1 week length per shift. I guess I was too stupid to go home. It was 2,500 miles away from home. It was in Anthony, New Mexico. My dad had driven me down there and packed me in my little efficiency apartment, no cell phones. All I could think of was, what do I do now? And then when I was handed keys and a uniform, and I realized, I don't have an office? No, you're a prison guard. And I looked on the compound at all of those humongous men who, I'm 22, older than me. I certainly couldn't fight any of them. And I knew then that I had crossed and met my limit. And, but I could achieve it. And I think Gettysburg instilled that in me. I found, and I could tell you all kinds of more stories that I'm not. But I will tell you, I was eventually embraced by the staff. Was not at first. They were very much against me. Why I didn't pick up the phone and call my parents, I don't know. But I had a sense from here that I could make it, I could belong, and I could be anywhere. And I took that with me. As I promoted through the system, many times I would be the only African American in the whole town. There's been times, a lot of times where I was the only one in the institution, but twice where I was the only one in the whole town. And I took the experience of Gettysburg with me, and I never forgot that I could achieve. I was never alone. There were people, if I needed to reach out, who God would plant an angel around me that I could reach out to. And then I began to understand that I was there for a reason. I never felt a minority in our agency as far as being Black, but I did feel the strong sense of commitment that I had to give to women. It didn't matter about, you're accepted. Race does not matter in a prison system because it's a wrong thing. Being female mattered a great deal. So I learned to make that connection. I am honored when I see the women as I go out and they're saying, oh, Vanessa Adams, and they act like, you know, she slayed dragons. I'm probably dead if I was to take the time, but I had so much. I really, truly believe that I had a cushion of experience that I got from my attending here. And going through my career, I just took little deposits from that build-up that I used in my experience and in my raising up and moving up in the agency. I'm proud to be here. I thank you. I thank Gettysburg for all the different awards that they've given, because I truly think that being a civil servant and doing and being of service to folks who really need me has been a blessing. Not only have I given, but I have received so much from, and I don't take it lightly. It was a determined decision that I was placed there by. I strongly think it was just what I was meant to do. And I think that if I have done it well, it's not because of me, but who has put me there. So thank you, and I look forward to your time.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, and what an honor to be amongst these women who are just have done such fabulous things in life, and amongst you all as well. I came here in 1973. When we were tasked with this challenge of talking today about what experience as a woman we had here that played a part in our lives professionally and privately, I kind of thought, oh, okay, no big deal. And a week later, when I started to think about it again, I thought, okay, no big deal. And then a week later, when I started to think about it, I never realized how it wasn't just retrospective. I wasn't just looking back. It was introspective as well. So I had to go through an exercise that, but for to this challenge that Jean and you have given us today, I would never have gone through. I had to figure out who I was when I came here, who I was when I was here, and who I was when I left. And I came to find that they may be two, and perhaps three very different people. But the common denominator is, this is the place where it all happened. When I came here in 1973, Roe versus Wade, Justice Blackmun signed Roe versus Wade. That was 1973. When I look back at what was going on in the world in 1973, not just in my little life as a high school senior on my way to Gettysburg College, I was amazed. The Little League had no girls. In 1973, the Supreme Court in New Jersey ruled as the first state Supreme Court that little girls could play Little League. The experts that the Little League Association put on the stand actually testified that young women were not physically able to compete on a baseball field with 6-year-old boys. Tell my daughter that. She played Little League until she was 12 years old with boys. She didn't want to play softball. She wanted to play Little League. But in 1973, that was the very first court that made that decision. In 1973, the House of Representatives, for the very first time, allowed a female page. Now we think everyone can sit here and say, well, there were no female corporate leaders in 1973, but my God, the first female page in the House of Representatives. There were no United States senators who were women in 1973, not a single one. And what I was looking forward to as a freshman at Gettysburg was leaving as a senior and perhaps improving the fact that women who were leaving when Helen left were making 60 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts in the same position. That means that when I left here, it would take me 2/3 more time to pay back my student loans than the fellow sitting beside me in class. That's huge. And I understood that on an academic level when I came here. I understood that this was the universe and the country and where I was. But I didn't really understand it on a personal level. Because when I came here, I came from a high school class, like you, of 800. I was a female student, we had lots of sports. I suffered no discrimination. When I got to Gettysburg, however, I realized what discrimination was. I was discriminated against. I felt the discrimination. I felt the protectionist attitude. For the first time, I was defined by my gender. I was called a co-ed. We all love that word. But when I looked it up in the Oxford Dictionary, I couldn't find the meaning of the word co. But the common meaning of that prefix is joined with or with. All right, that's not a bad thing. That is if the males were the co-eds as well as the females. But when you look in the Oxford Dictionary, it also has a definition for co-ed, believe it or not. It's a female student in a university, a co-educational university. That never sat right with me. From the moment I walked on this campus, co-ed, having someone call me a co-ed, whether it be a professor or an administrator or a fellow student, or particularly a male student, call me a co-ed, was particularly demeaning to me. I had never felt that before. I had to use a key card to get into my dorm. My male counterparts sitting in class walked into Stein Hall, walked into Rex. I had to use a key card. My father thought that was terrific. I didn't think it was so terrific. Our dorms closed at 11 o'clock, and they locked. They locked. Huber Hall locked at 11 o'clock. So then came the night when I was going to be late. Ran across campus by myself in the dark, trying so hard to dive for that door before it locked that I fell on the concrete steps on the back of Huber and left a trail of blood. Went to my room on the 3rd floor, went to sleep, thought nothing of it. Phew. I survived. I got into the dorm before 11 o'clock. The next day, however, campus security was all over Huber Hall. There was a knifing, there was, someone was dead, they had to find a missing female student. I wrapped my foot, I put my foot in my shoe, and I never said a word. To this day, I don't know who was fake. I really should find it. The head of security said, it's over. And it's not a cold case either. But that was the level of protectionism that I felt as a female student here. And the fellow who sat beside me in class, I could go to his dorm. His dorm was open. It was not locked past 11. And we couldn't have male students in Huber Hall. They had to be received in the lobby. And they stayed in the lobby, technically. They were supposed to stay in the lobby. But that's the world that was here. And what I left with from that experience was knowing a perspective, having a real personal perspective on discrimination. Albeit, I will agree with you, it is nuanced, it's subtle, but it still was discrimination. So when I had the opportunity later in life, much later in life, to be in a position where I could help and affect change in a law firm, those are the reflections, that's the perspective that I had that came from being in this place. Now, when we were charged with this responsibility of reflecting on our experience as a woman student, that was a difficult task in and of itself to differentiate between being a student and a woman student. That is difficult. But perspective is what I gained and what I took away from this place. What else I took away from this place was a sense of community. We were in tumultuous times. We were in the most tumultuous times with civil rights and women's rights and the Vietnam War. In 1973 to 1977, it doesn't get more tumultuous than that. But for some reason, this campus was a petri dish for the exchange of ideas. The professors here and the centers here promoted free thinking. And we respected each other. And whether it's because this college is surrounded and sits on hallowed ground, I can't tell you. But I can tell you that this place has a soul. Everyone I know who graduates from here feels that same sense of soul. So there really is not a female issue, but it is. When we were here, I did not have one single female professor. Not a single female professor. The only female that I had any experience with was Grace Kenny, because I came here as a field hockey player. And she was the entire phys ed department. She was the field hockey coach. She was the only female mentor for that school. So it was my experience that I sought the community of other women. Most particularly, I lived across the street in a house that's no longer there, in a place called East Cottage, with 7 women. Though that experience, all very diverse women, very different women, were different when they came into the school, were different here, and were very different when they left. And the experience that I had with those, living with my fellow women students, probably laid the groundwork for all of the respect that I have for the choices that women make today. The second part of what we were supposed to discuss was, are our experiences still relevant? And I'm standing here in front of, my daughter is a junior here, in front of some of her friends who are also young women, juniors here at the college. And I will tell you, it is. It's not all in the past. What we lived through in the late 60s and early 70s was the basis of the change. We laid the foundation for the change. It was so basic, you look at us now like, how could that happen? How could you have not had a daughter who could play on a Little League team? How could you pay a woman 60 cents instead of $1? Those were such basic rights. We helped take care of that. I say we, I mean all of the women who worked for all that change back then. That was all taken care of. But that doesn't mean that the work is finished. In fact, I think that your generation have a much more difficult and complex job than we ever did. We knew what was out there that we had to change. But there are other now nuanced changes that need to come about. You have choices now. But those choices without social responsibility and without social value, I believe, aren't choices at all. Coupled with the fact that now your world is a global world. And there are many, many places in this world who don't obviously have the rights that you have. So I will tell you that what we lived through is very relevant to you. And that we look to you to help embark upon the change to keep this going. When I was driving here, I can tell you that I saw something that I would not have seen when I drove here in 1973 with my mother in our car. The bumper sticker in front of me at the toll booth said, "My wife is in the Air Force." I sat there, the toll taker looked down at me and said, "Ma'am," that's all she said. And I looked up and went, oh. And this car was driving away with a male driver and the bumper sticker said, "My wife is in the Air Force." And I thought that was remarkable because here I am on the way back to a place that was so different when I was here. I'd like to close by saying that I am convinced that the young women who are here now are so different than we were, that I feel so proud of what these women are made of. I only wished I could have been half of what they are when they're here and what they're doing. Going across continents, helping change social situations, running Invisible Children events at the school, And I was reminded last night by an email from my daughter that I promised Ashley Allison, that I would share. When she sent me an email from, she's in New Zealand. Mom, I just got off of the plane. I went skydiving. In my entire life, I would never imagine being 20 years old and going skydiving. So my message to you is continue the skydiving.
I am having this flood of memories that just, I feel like doors kept opening when you all were speaking, and it was overwhelming actually at a couple of points. But what wonderful reflections. What we'd like to do now is open it up for some conversation. So I would invite you, if you have thoughts or questions that you would like, either thoughts to share or questions you would like to pose our panelists to do so.
I was going to say, Janet, that it's interesting for me to hear the alumna talk about the 60-40 business. You might be interested to hear from a faculty point of view. When I first came here, I mean, I had an advantage of teaching in the English department, and women have always liked to major in English because it's the subject you major in if you really want to become something. But the non-major courses and the lit and sound courses were typical courses. All men, maybe one or two women. And I remember standing outside doors thinking, I was about to enter a men's locker room and I had to bolster myself up. So it did have a figure. And visitors to campus, I remember Bob Norvall told me one time, a visitor to campus said to him, boy, this campus is really masculine. And so there was that difference and we all felt it.
I was thinking about this issue of number of female faculty members. And I've tried to list, the female faculty members I can remember from the 70s. I came up with maybe a half a dozen. I never had a tenured or tenure track female faculty member in 4 years. Never.
That's because you were afraid to take the course.
No, it's because I had a double major and neither of them was English. I didn't have time to do anything else. I always heard about Mary Margaret. Always. I had a good friend who always talked about Mary Margaret. You have questions for our panelists? Sure.
There's something I graduated in '71 here, and was very much involved with the anti-war, the whole, my friends were getting drafted, of course only the guys, but still, it was a huge deal. And I remember being, so-called hippie and really putting out ideas and kind of instigating actions, but I wasn't allowed to go to the planning meetings because I was a girl. Which was, at the time, I mean, it was just like when I couldn't join the Little League team when I was a kid. It really pissed me off, but I didn't say anything. You know what I mean? And so it was very much, but some of the wonderful things that happened, Mary Margaret and also Lou Hammond helped me. My dad had this expression, use your head for something besides a hat rack, and they really helped me do that. And it really expanded my mind. I grew up in Selinsgrove, PA, small town, and going to Gettysburg really helped set me on a course of opening my mind. And anyway, just wanted to share that.
I would agree. Some of those one-on-one relationships with faculty members, the men, had, I think, tremendous influence on many of us. And I think you were hearing some of that. Certainly, I had mentors here who were men who had tremendous impact on me personally. But the overall context was very strange, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that you were not allowed to go to a meeting because you were a female is remarkable.
Yeah.
I had, while you're thinking of things that you would like to share, I'm going to share one little tidbit. When I was a senior, the college wanted to put forth a name to the Danforth Foundation for a Danforth Fellowship. The college had to pick one person to put forward, and I was planning to go to graduate school. And so I was in the running to be the college nominee for that. And I remember very distinctly being brought into Pennsylvania Hall in a seminar room. And I think it was, one of 2 times I was in Pennsylvania Hall during my college career. And it was all men around the table, certainly, and that wasn't surprising to me until they started asking me about my seriousness about going to graduate school. I was engaged to be married. And I had a ring on my finger. And I remember very distinctly them saying, well, why should we support you if you're going to be married? And I just remember just being stunned by that. It hadn't occurred to me that my eligibility for this fellowship would be impacted by the fact that I was going to be married. And so I had to go through this whole ordeal about my husband. So he said he's going to come with me. And, I'm thinking later, why do I have to explain this to this people? But it was just such a different, context then. I can guarantee no men were asked that question in the process.
Well, Janet, I didn't, but I can remember in the English department when we interview women in the 60s, and this all stopped in maybe not the 80s, but in the 70s perhaps. When we'd interview a woman, and she was a married woman, would always ask, what's your husband going to do? We'll never ask a man what his wife is going to do. Ringo? And then we had to coach the men that they couldn't do that.
That's right. Carol, what were you going to say?
Not very important, but as a response to the idea of some loneliness on the part of women in trying to find a place where women could be with women and talk to women without the sense of being protected and forced into this ghetto, which was going to be just women. Being a woman teacher here during the 1970s was a very lonely place if you weren't in the English department or the other language departments. I lived in the basement of the chapel with 2 male colleagues, and I was down the hall. There was no one who wanted to listen to anything I had to say, no one who wanted to listen to a question. And there wasn't only that aspect of it, but there was the same aspect at the same time that nobody wanted to hear what you had to say, but you were scrutinized very carefully. For instance, once I made the mistake of going for coffee at the lamppost with one of JV's assistants.
When the lamppost was a restaurant.
And my chairperson's wife made an appointment with me to warn me, you know who I mean, that I should not do that. That kind of thing. So that at the same time there was nobody to talk to, you were very carefully watched. It was an interesting experience. Interesting. Yes, you're right.
Other thoughts to share or questions?
Well, this is just a little reminiscence.
Sure.
I mean, people who are talking about having to let themselves in with key cards, but I graduated in '71. So also lived in Huber, and but we had dorm mothers. So, it wasn't so long ago things were even more protectionist. But I'm realizing when people talk about not having female professors, that I married Margaret. I mean, once I discovered Mary Margaret, I took every course I could with her. I think not just because she was a brilliant teacher, but probably also because she was a woman and an intellectual woman. And that just has such a strong appeal for me. But I'm thinking I was probably in a minority that I was an English major, but I also had Amy Godwin for French, I had Senora Wiener for Spanish, I had dance teacher, right? Took voice with Marie Boudet. So, you sort of found these people that you needed. But my experience at Gettysburg, again, if people can't separate out what's being woman and what isn't, was for me one of the real important experiences was not being in the sorority system, fraternity system, so being a GDI, and very proud of it, goddamn independent. So, you know, Gettysburg, for me, was a place where, as a person, I could become myself, and I really appreciate that. I have a memory that I've told innumerable people of walking to the freshman picnic or something we had one of the first days we were here, and I was walking along the sidewalk by the men's dorms by myself for some reason, which was pretty typical. I was kind of shy and probably came across as snobby as a result. In high school, one of those intellectual girls in high school. But as I was walking to this event, I thought, hardly anybody knows me here. I can be outgoing. Which really set the tone for my life. And I think involvement in things like Alan Nightingale and singing and being in chapel choir and being part of the communities of risk seminars. Anybody who was here in the late 60s or early 70s might remember these programs that were sponsored by the Chapel Council, where you would join for a semester. And you started off on a weeknight at supper time, cooked supper with the other 12 or 13 people, and you left in the morning. There were places you could sleep, but most of us just stayed up all night and talked. And it was half and half. Yeah, I think if I remember, it was half women and half men balance. And in my experience here, it was actually one of real engagement as a woman, you know, rather than so much being, I think things like having to come in at 10 o'clock, I'm sure when we were freshmen, not 11. Yeah. Was it 10 o'clock?
Yeah, it was 11 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah, 11 o'clock on Friday. Was, you know, that was just the nonsense that was part of the world, you know. But being here, I really did always feel that my voice as a student was taken seriously, and really, really appreciate that. I think it's been important in my life throughout. So I'm very grateful to Gettysburg for that sense of ownership of my mind. Yeah.
I think, Joe, so much shifted from that early 70s to late 70s. And I don't know if Vanessa and Jane felt the same, but, you know, I remember that first year there were hours in residence halls, and by, I think the next year, I think that had gone away.
I don't remember. I had to just struggle to get that memory. Yeah. Because it was freshman year is the only time I remember being restricted. And after that, I really don't. I don't remember.
Yeah, and then we went to co-ed living in Apple Hall. So you had, you know, the annex and the hall. Yeah. One was males, one was females. You have a common lobby, and that was our co-ed dorm. And actually, and it was, although not always. My future husband lived on one side, and I lived on the other. I don't admit that. But that you know, things were starting to shift pretty quickly. The male-female ratio shifted dramatically during that time. I think when I was applying to college, we were at that 70-30, 60-40, and I think by the time we graduated, it was closer to 50-50. So things were really starting to move here in terms of the culture. But I just want to reinforce what you just said, which that notion that I think so many of us expressed here, that a sense of being taken seriously as an individual by particular faculty members, deans, and so on, in a way that really did engage us, even despite the very strange, larger context we were in. And that, of course, is so important and continues to be important. Nancy.
I'm reminded of the many parietals that we had when I first came here as Dean of Women. And of course, I had to be the enforcer to a certain extent, but I also was a person who tried very hard to change the rules and regulations. And we had a famous sit-in about 1971, I think, when women's hours were brought up as being, you know, totally unfair. And I was right there with the women. But we had to deal with some pretty conservative trustees in those days. So we had to go kind of not as fast as some of us would have liked. But just so you can get a perspective on this whole thing, when I was an undergraduate student, not here, we had to be in by 7 o'clock, and we had to get permission to ride in cars. So you see. I'm just so happy that we're talking about this and how quickly our memory of women's past is lost, because when I came to Gettysburg in 1984, I had, you know, a couple students that I just talked to about how's my class going, or what do you think? And one of them told me, well, don't talk anymore, because I was teaching a gender inequality class, about having to be in the dorm at those hours and the dress code, because people will think you're really, really old.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Sue Ulrich Currens, and I am a recovering hippie. And I was, still am. When I came here in 1968, we had to sign, I was in Stevens Hall, we had to sign in and out. We had house parents. They were a seminary couple who lived right there. I came out of New York City. My high school was much bigger than the college. And I used to call home on a regular basis and tell my mother to get me out of here. Because it was, I mean, for example, sometime during that time period, we got a letter sent home asking permission of our parents to have self-limiting hours so that we could come and go in the dorm. And I gave it to my father. He said, what's this? I said, well, they want to know if I can have permission to come and go. He said, what does that mean? I said, like here, Dad, like at home. And he said, oh yeah, okay, sure. But that's the situation that it was. Now, I did make it through the 4 years, and also made it into up to vice president of a sorority for all of 6 months, and then I bolted out of there too. But I went on to have a career in the Department of Defense as a special agent, the first woman in 3 states. Also granted to me, probably because I was female and there was a whole lot of pressure to get the women on board, you know. But at one point when I interviewed for that job, they also, I wasn't even married, and they asked me, what happens if I got pregnant, would I leave them? It's like, I'm not even married. But when I interviewed, they did say, you had to do a writing sample. And they told me then that I wrote beautifully. And I attribute that to Gettysburg College, too.
You know, you just mentioned something, Sue, about that feeling like, well, you know, part of the reason I got the job was because they needed women.
They did.
I have to tell you, that this was an era, I don't know if you all found this, but I certainly did, where I worried over that. And Vanessa may also have felt this at moments. I mean, when you feel as if you have gotten something because, not of your abilities, but sort of, you know, something, a square they can check off, that is a terribly, well, it's just a terrible situation to be in terms of one's self-confidence.
I knew that I was totally qualified. I mean, I could drive a car, read a map, interview people, and write.
Yeah.
And I didn't carry a gun either, you know. But the attitude was, this was a male-oriented field, and well, what made them think I could do this?
Yeah. I know when I went to graduate school, I was very worried that I had gotten in and I was going to be the token female. And it made me so anxious until I got there and saw there were more women than men in my program, and I relaxed finally. But that sense of being a token is a terrible.
And I think some can't pass the token. I mean, some can't get past that, and it becomes what makes them fail. Because they realize, yes, I know there's been many doors that's been opened for me because of being a female, maybe even being African American. But it was me who had to do the job and be successful at it. And you had to stay focused of that. And I've seen so many women, especially, because that's my main focus in the Bureau of Prisons, who even get up to the point of being a warden and just completely fall flat on their face because they feel that they were given the job being a female and never realize that they are the ones. You know, at some point you gotta say, okay, I'm in, but I'm the one who has to stay. I mean, being who I was may have gotten the door open, but Vanessa Adams had to come out of that and rise above. But I've seen so many let that token or let that idea fail them. It's still there, it's subtle. And I think a lot of that, when I reflect back on was my experiences relevant and all that, or relevant to today, absolutely. It's just hidden behind rules, legislation, economics. It's just hidden so well. And what I try to teach folks is to look past it and think about what this is and who this is going to truly impact. Because you have to. We cannot go back to 71, 73. We can't afford to allow that. And in our systems, if we forget and don't really examine what's ahead of us and become educated on the topics, it won't, but it will. That subtle legislation, subtle rules, subtle regulations will do exactly what it did back then.
Yeah, I was going to respond that in trying to become a head of a school in the late 80s, having been at a Quaker school for 15 or 18 years, the bias against women was huge. And my two favorite questions were from actually on the same search committee in Boston, which one might think is a haven of liberalism, not, but at any rate, one question, very serious, highly educated men and women was, well, how would a woman handle a big budget? Carefully, I said, very carefully. And then the next question was, and I had been at Germantown Friends School in Philadelphia and been the dean of students, and it's a large co-educational institution, and et cetera, and the principal, and the question was, well, how would a woman talk to male alumni? I said, in English is mostly my language, English. English. And I left the interview and I called the headhunter and I said, don't ever send me to a place like this again. Because these people were antediluvian. I mean, it was just unbelievable. The bias about, you know, that women couldn't, I'm sure the college presidents have the same, you know, that how could you possibly run a school that had a $25 million operating budget? Carefully, very carefully. But that still is true. Now, there are many more women heads of school. There were 60 in my so-called class in 1992 when I became the head of a woman. When I became the head of the school, there were 5 women and 55 men in the large independent schools in the United States in that year. It's very dramatic. There are more women now, but it still is not, I hope those questions are no longer being asked. How would I talk to boys?
I think that Vanessa, both of you, your points are well taken, but my question is, where were the women to support these other women when they were failing? And that's what I see in law firms. The women are there, they're at entry level, they do well, they're incredibly brilliant, their work ethic, I am sorry, I am biased, their work ethic exceeds that of their male counterparts. And we get to the 4th or 5th year, and they start worrying about work-life balance and family-life balance, and all of a sudden, it all falls away. And what I see is the lack of female support for the person sitting next to you. If the woman, for example, an associate in a law firm, wants to go part-time and raise her family and work, fine. If she wants to leave the law firm because she wants to be a full-time mother, that's fine. If she wants to then have a family because she wants to devote herself to the law, that's fine. But that's not what I see. I see women judging women. And I think that that's the, going forward, that's the challenge that these young women need to meet. I felt it here, and I'm sorry to say that however many years later, we still haven't gotten by that. We judge each other, and we are the worst judge of each other than any male counterpart could ever be. So that's part of what we do at our law firm to bolster women and retain. It's really not about getting women into law firms. They're there. We can get them. We just can't keep them. We can't keep them long enough to promote them. And so Vanessa, that goes to your point. I mean, I have to believe that it's something about a support system falling apart or never existing.
And it's also, I know what I had to struggle with is when I came in, as I told you, my moving up, I was typically the only female. So they had secretaries, but they were never allowed to work with male inmates. So my support were men. and I had to probably tolerate far more than anyone should have ever had to. But now, you know, once I became warden, it was I had to remind myself when I had this young female sitting in front of me and telling me about something that I figured a good chewing out could have handled. I had to remind myself that maybe what I went through in my day shouldn't have been tolerated. And her point may seem so insignificant and so trivial, and all you had to do is say, you know what, go yourself. Maybe I can't make light of her, and I have to give her some skills and some suggestions and work. I find I've had to learn to be a lot more sensitive to the women's issues today because of, in my past, they were so raw. And that's what we have to remind in my group. I'm a member of the Association of Women Executives, Correctional Leaders. And that's what we often remind ourselves when we're reaching back and pulling up, is that, okay, so it may not seem like a big deal, but did we have to tolerate what we did, and we have to still give them skills, because it's so easy to get in the closet, cloakroom, and start saying, oh my God, can you believe they're complaining about this or they're complaining about that? And, you know, they're a single mom, and you know, and a lot of us, I mean, I was a single mother coming up, trying to manage, you know, running 3,600 inmates and managing 600 staff, you know, but I can't make light of the fact that this person, to me, has it easier, but yet, no, they still have issues. And I think that's the biggest obstacle that women who can reach out and support have to do. And I think that's what we get jaded and kind of not reach out or not take so seriously. That it's still a mountain. It's still a mountain. And just because it wasn't a mountain that we had to climb, it's still a mountain, and we have to help and reach out and support.
Thank you. Well, I think now, when I got out of law school, I was at a big firm, so they prided themselves on having a support system. Well, I was assigned a mentor because in the 200 attorneys in the firm, there were 6 women. There were even 2 partners. And my mentor, I mean, this was the early 80s, you know, navy blue suits, little floppy ties. And this woman, the culture was such that when she had her second child, you know, she must have been 7 months pregnant before she would like just stop pinning her skirt more loosely, because heaven forfend someone should realize that she might be having a baby. She was a corporate lawyer. So there's been trying, but what I think they're doing is that it's not so much the reaching back and the letting women have choices, but you know, I thought feminism was about men having choices too, and that's what, you know, we're not talking about. That, you know, whether women want to stay home or whether they want to work full time or whatever, that, to me, that's not it. Now, granted, I went out and started my own firm because I said, I'm not dealing with this anymore. I'd rather be the boss. But so I think that's really thank you. I lose my train of thought. Besides, but because what you were saying there too, things have gone backwards. I mean, you know, the law is not what it was in 1973 when Roe versus Wade was passed. There's been backtrack after backtrack after backtrack. So it's not over. And I don't even know, sometimes it's very subtle, but you all have a lot to do.
We are nearly at the end of our time. Any final comments before? Yes, Karen.
Well, I'd like to make a comment. We've talked a lot about women and women supporting, and you just made the point about the men. And I think one of the challenges that we continue to face, whether we're women of the 70s, 80s, 90s, or the new millennium, is the men that we engage with. Are they understanding the changes and giving us the respect and acknowledging our capabilities as they should, as they have, you know, it's a slow evolution, but that's the challenge we have, is to continue to garner that respect and to be at the table, fully at the table, and an integral part of decision making on volunteer boards or in corporate rooms, you know, CEOs, whatever position you get into. And I think that's one of the challenges that a study program they can't just be looking at the women's piece. There's a piece of making sure these men are getting the message here and treating women as they treat their own colleagues in a respectful and acknowledging their skills and what they bring to the table.
Yes.
I just want to hook onto that for a moment. I'm Charlotte Arps from the German department, and I agree with you very much. Sorry, I have my back to you.
That's quite all right.
I don't know where I put my back here. And I'm supposed to speak later, and I guess I will. Sorry about this. I don't have to. Good. I think what the big challenge is not just informing men. I think for me, the biggest challenge is issues not of gender only, but of class. I find enormous class issues here on campus now. And I find enormous issues of race continuing. And feminism, for me, approaches all those three things. And I just would like to hook onto that, and maybe we could talk about that in the afternoon. Thank you.
That's a great observation. And I think to wrap this up, I will just say, I was jotting some notes as I heard all of you speaking, and there really is sort of at the core of this, the human element, that the strands here of continuing to learn, and I loved your thing about a need to be disturbed, I think is a wonderful metaphor, actually. I want to get that exact line from you. We talked a little bit about the Gettysburg helping women and others to set high standards, high goals for themselves, a sense of soul, I heard, a sense of community. It was really wonderful to hear some of these things because so many of them continue to be so important on our campus here today. And it's that one-on-one interaction, the support we can give to each other as community members, I think, which is so important. Thank you all. Allison, are you going to give us direction, or Jean, about what we do next? Go ahead. As you're standing, let's give the panelists a round. We are so grateful to all of you that have come and spent this time with us. Thank you.